Ladies' Night by Amie Kaufman and Meagan. This is a really good book. This is a historical fantasy novel. I guess is it historical if it's just like a vague medieval fantasy world with dragons and small villages and castles and sexism? You know what I mean. It's the typical fantasy world, and the intro to this book is really good. I love this first chapter. I guess it's more like a prologue. It's a narrator intermission. I think the narrator in this is my favorite character. It's like this weird, omniscient voice. I want to say it's a man, but it's actually probably not. Thematically with the novel, it's probably not a man. So I should check my internal biases there. The narrator is omniscient and sort of not bound by time and makes a lot of sort of anachronistic jokes. There's a good spattering of intentionally anachronistic moments in this that are played off for comedy, and I think they work really well. But anyway, this book opens on the narrator describing like just a vague medieval town, and even talks about how the details aren't really important and you can kind of fill in your own details. It literally breaks the fourth wall and says like, imagine a medieval town and imagine a castle, and maybe the castle has a moat and maybe there are alligators. That doesn't really make sense, but you know, you can have alligators if you want to. And it's really fun. It really sets the tone of this piece. I loved the narrator interjections. We get a few of them throughout the book, and they're always like really funny. Kind of wish we had more of the narrator, honestly. But anyway, this is a medieval fantasy about a noblewoman and a town girl, the blacksmith's daughter, who poses as a knight and falls in love with the noblewoman, who is the prize for this jousting tournament of knights. So the first main character we're introduced to is Lady Isabel, and she's called the Queen Bee. That's one of those anachronisms with like terminology. So Lady Isabel, she's a rich noblewoman. Everyone assumes that she's kind of ditzy and out of touch, but she's actually a lot smarter than she lets on. She's sort of a schemy character, and she knows she's beautiful, she knows she's popular. She's like the trendsetter in town. She's the fashion setter. Everyone loves her and looks up to her and like has a crush on her or wants to be her. Everyone in the town really idolizes her, but no one really thinks much of her beyond her beauty and her wealth. But she's secretly pretty crafty, pretty smart. And the book does a really good job of showing you this. They don't just tell you this. It would have been really easy to open on Isabel's point of view going, everyone underestimates me, I'm actually super smart, and just telling you that. But instead they show it to you. So very early on in the book, she meets the second main character, Gwen, who is the blacksmith's daughter, and she's really doing all the blacksmithing at this point. Her father's depressed and doesn't work, which is kind of a fantasy novel cliche for some reason. But anyway, she does all the work, but she can't tell anyone really that she does the work because she's a woman. This is a very sexist society, very traditional gender roles, and no one would respect her as a blacksmith. So she's selling her father's wares at this market for like a festival in town that's a pre-event for the big tournament that's coming to town soon, where all the knights will joust. And so Lady Isabel comes to this market stall and completely overpays for horseshoes. There's a really funny scene. Isabel's with her friends and her maid, and Gwen is selling her these horseshoes, and she's just gonna give her the market rate, which is pretty cheap. It's a horseshoe, you know? And Isabel's maid is in the background telling her to raise the price. And like, you know, scam this girl out of her money, except not scam. We later learn that character is a pretty interesting character. All the side characters in this are actually pretty good and like pretty complex or interesting in their own right. But anyway, so we have Gwen selling Isabel these horseshoes for way beyond market value, and you as the audience and Gwen are like, oh, this rich girl's totally out of touch, ditzy, financially irresponsible, doesn't know what she's doing. And then we switch to Isabel's point of view, and she's like, I know horseshoes don't cost that much, but I'll pay them anyway because I'm rich. She also kind of has a crush on Gwen, like immediately is sort of drawn to her for some reason. She doesn't know she's gay yet. Gwen does know she's gay, and Isabel figures it out through the book. They fall in love, spoiler alert. Anyway, the real plot of this book comes in. Gwen has always wanted to be a knight, but she can't because she's a woman. But she has her own sword that she crafted her own armor, she has this horse that she trains on. She really practices this by herself, and she really dreams of becoming a knight. And she has this dream to enter the next tournament, in disguise. Like, as a knight, you wear your helmet, and so no one would know she was a woman as long as she kept her helmet on. So she's trying to scrounge up enough money to enter this tournament, and she doesn't think she's going to be able to until Lady Isabel overpays for horseshoes. And Lady Isabel is the prize for the tournament. Whoever wins the tournament wins a bunch of gold and, like, prestige, but they also win the hand-in-marriage of this noble woman who's offered up as, like, the dragon sacrifice, but there's no dragons anymore, or there haven't been for a long time. And so now, instead of being sacrificed to the dragon, she's sacrificed to the knights. And supposedly one of them will be a grand husband to her, but they all suck. She doesn't want to marry any of these men. She wants to marry for love. And she recognizes Gwen. It's a really good sequence. Because she was at Gwen's tent, like, she saw her sword and, like, the design on the sword and the design of her armor and stuff. And she recognizes Gwen as this knight. And she hatches this scheme that she's going to help Gwen win the tournament and, like, help her practice. And she has, like, she's rich, so she has all these, like, royal guards, like a groundskeeper. She invites Gwen to move into the castle with her to train and win this tournament so that Isabel doesn't have to marry any of these shitty men. And then they fall in love, and that's as much of the plot I'll get into. That was a pretty long plot description, but that's really, like, the initial setup. It's a really good book. There's a lot of good details. Like, a lot of the details in this come back around in really, like, satisfying ways. Again, the way Isabel recognizes the sword and, like, the specific design on the sword, and also the name Gwen chooses to go under, Sir Gawain instead of Sir Gwyn. She recognizes that. So there's a lot of it's pretty smart the way this is done. Like, it could have just been really, I don't know, contrived ways. A lesser book would have written this differently, and I really like the way this was written. It's very competent. It's nothing, like, crazy surprising, but it's just really well crafted and really well done. It's a pretty traditional knight and dragon story, fantasy, medieval story, but it's not, like, telegraphed. I didn't exactly know where this was going all the time. In fact, I thought it was going, like, different places, like, where does she win the tourney? Or, like, when does she lose in the tourney? Or, like, is there a twist? Does she get found out? There are a lot of things that I couldn't predict, or I predicted incorrectly, which is fun. With such, like, such a sort of trope-filled kind of story in this very classic land, in this very old school style story. But this was, like, a fresh twist on it, and it feels very contemporary, the writing, again, like, with the anachronisms, but also the themes. The themes are very much sisterhood and community and womanhood and women's struggles. So this book's definitely about, like, the struggles of women and women bonding together to overcome that. And I think that's done really well. I think some people could argue that it's a bit on the nose. Like, it's very overt. Like, it specifically spells out that is the theme multiple times. There's one chapter where it did get too heavy-handed, where it says it twice. Like, Isabel's, like, really realizing her plight and, like, just really finally coming to terms with it. And she gives this beautiful analogy about every woman is in her own prison. They're all in different prisons, but the common denominator is that men hold the keys. So that's a good metaphor. I like it. But then in the same chapter, not that long later, she's like, we're all birds in golden cages. We're these pretty exotic birds, and it's like we're here for show, and we think we're so beautiful, but really we're trapped in a cage. And I'm like, yeah, you just said that. You just said that, but in a different metaphor. We don't really need both. They're both, like, good. They're both well written, and they fit the theme, and I like the theme. But it was you hit the nail on the head a couple times. You kind of beat a dead horse there. That's, like, a really minor criticism of this book. Someone, I don't know, I could see someone complaining that the themes were too overt and too spelled out for the audience. But, like, that's the story they wanted to tell, and I think it's fine. I think really only that one chapter was where it was really ham-fisted and thrown in your face. Right in there. The only other criticism, not really a criticism, I'll get into is there's a sort of magical element that gets introduced, not just with the dragon. There's witches. There's the idea of a head witch that gets introduced pretty early. Like there's head witches, hedge witches. I don't know why that's hard to say. Like there's hedge witches selling wares at the market and like selling sort of like love charms and stuff. And there's sort of some inklings that people don't really know if it's real or not, or if they're just women who kind of are able to read emotions and the sort of con men. And they come up a couple times, and then there's one woman who's accused of it, and that woman gets arrested. I don't really know if she gets arrested for hedge witchery or if that was just like another insult they added to the pile. But I thought that would have been more interesting to explore, like how punished are these people, or like how ostracized are they, and like how seriously do the authorities take any displays of magic. That would have been interesting. And then there's one moment where Isabel meets a witch, and the witch sort of implies that Isabel maybe also has like latent magical powers, and that doesn't really come up. I guess we're kind of in spoilers. There's a moment where they oversee a like ritual, a coven of witches like under the full moon, but it's kind of vague as to whether it's actual magic or if it's just like a sisterhood where they bond, and it's the only group that these women have, like a place to come and share their struggles as women and sort of be bonded as women, and that it's not actually a magical power, it's just sort of an innate communal power, the power of friendship. That's actually a line that gets said once. They win a battle with the power of friendship, and like they literally do. So that's fun. And then I guess if it is just a human power, the power of love, the power of friendship, I guess Isabel does connect into that, and she realizes that she has all of these women in her life who support her. But if it was real magic, then I wanted to see Isabel do some magic. I thought there could have been just a little bit more done with that. Maybe not. Maybe it was just the power of friendship and she realized that and I didn't realize that because I'm a dum-dum. But I found the head witch is interesting and I wanted to know more. So that's like not even a criticism, because it was just like, that's cool, I want more of that. So that'd be cool. I wonder if there'd be a sequel to this. I don't think it needs a sequel. Definitely doesn't need a sequel. But I would read one, I think. There's a lot left open-ended here that you could do for a sequel. I think maybe you could explore Isabel as a witch. Again, the dragons are back. I said there's hasn't been dragons in years. Spoiler alert, there's a dragon. So there's some implication that they could go monster hunting and dragon hunting, and then there's implication that there might be creatures other than dragons that he'd slain, in a typical medieval fantasy world fashion. There's other creatures. So I think you definitely could do a sequel to this. And then there's like a side character who like clearly has some very interesting past. I won't get into big spoilers here or anything. But there's one character who's really, really interesting, and we don't get their whole story. We just get like inklings of it, and the main characters are like, that's not my business. So that's cool. I'd like to know more about that character if there was a sequel to this. I'd definitely read a sequel. I guess I wrote down like some notes. I guess one more thing that some people might not like, but I liked it, honestly. I didn't mind it at all. But the narrator breaks the fourth wall a lot and like literally talks to you. I just mentioned it in the beginning where they tell you to imagine a castle and, picture whatever you want. So the narrator directly speaks to you, the reader, multiple times. And there was only one moment where I thought it was like too far. I don't even remember what that was, actually. But I remember I had one moment where I was like, okay, like, maybe it was the section where they're talking about, like, tropes. I think they mentioned, like, the one bed trope or something, and, like, this is how novels go, and it was very tongue-in-cheek and, like, self-aware, and I think that one only didn't work because it was a really short narrator interjection. None of them were very long, but this one was really short, and it was, like, only a fourth wall break. Sometimes there's, like, other stuff happening, and the narrator tells you something about a character, or even something sometimes that's happening in the plot. But this one was like just a cheeky fourth wall break, and I'm like, that's just a tad too much. And I could see other people criticizing that. I didn't really mind it. Again, most of the time I thought it was really successful and really funny, and I honestly wanted more of the narrator. I felt like they got a bit more moments near the beginning, and then it sort of fizzled out through the novel. I'd have to like really dig into that to check, but it felt like we weren't getting quite as many narrator intermissions, and I was missing it. I really like the narrator. I think the narrator was my favorite character, even though I mentioned all of these characters are good, and I think they're well introduced, and I think they're well played, and they all serve a purpose in the plot, except for like maybe a couple of Isabel's friends, but she has a whole group. But there's a couple who do get their moment to shine for sure. And then even like the ones who don't, there's one girl who's just like slutty. She's just like the slut friend, and she's kind of funny. So I guess that's just for comedic effect. But anyway, all these characters are good, but I think the narrator was my favorite because I didn't know who they were. You don't get to know who the narrator is. I guess that's kind of a spoiler because I was like waiting for the narrator to reveal themselves, because at one point they even call themselves an unreliable narrator. So I'm like, this must be like a person. It's not just like a vague, omniscient, nothingness, just the void looking down on them and describing things that can't be told through the perspective of Isabel or Gwen. So I'm like, who is this character? I really want to know more about the narrator and like how they knew things through time and how they knew everything. I don't know. They were really interesting. And they were really funny. That's what I really, really liked about them. I think this book starts funny, even in like Isabel and Gwen's point of view. There's like a lot of really funny moments early on, and a lot of like anachronism stuff. And like when Gwen's at the market and she's selling her wares, she's selling her knives, but she gives a very TV infomercial spiel about how great her knives are, and it just feels very 21st century, and it's really funny. But then in the middle of the book, when the plot picks up, there's a lot less funny moments with those characters. Only the narrator is getting those funny moments, and I was really kind of missing the comedy. Yeah, it doesn't need it. Like the drama is really good in this, and I think it's really well written. But I loved the comedy. I think that really sets this book apart in some ways, and so even more comedy I would have loved. If this had been like super, super funny all the way through, this would have been like one of the tippy top books of the year. It's still a great book. It's a 5-star read for me. Definitely recommend. One of the better books of the year for sure. But I think just more comedy could have even put it tippy top. So if there was a sequel, I'd love to see more funniness. And I think a sequel would lend itself to that, because a lot of the drama here and like the melodrama comes from the relationship problems and Gwen and Isabel not being able to be together, and Gwen not being able to be herself. And then in a second book, when they're in an established relationship, you could maybe have room for more levity, and the drama could be with like some of the side characters. I mean, you'd have to have drama. I'm not asking for like a cozy fantasy novel, but I think the strong unit of Gwen and Isabel not fighting, and they don't really fight in this book, but they obviously have moments where they're sort of star-crossed lovers, but them totally together as a unit, self-assured, strong, devoted to each other, and just helping other people with their problems, or like being together with their problems. I don't know, I think it could be funnier, like just a little bit maybe. Even if it was this amount of funny, I would still read it because it was good. It was great. And I don't know why I'm talking about a sequel, because I don't know if there's going to be a sequel. There was no like obvious sequel bait where it's like to be continued. But it just set itself up well to either end or to have a sequel. So maybe if the book does well, they'll consider doing a sequel or not. I have no idea. I have no idea what these authors have said about it. I don't really follow them or know anything about them. I've never read anything from either of these people. I don't know if they're prone to writing series. I don't know, but I liked this book. So I would recommend you read it, so that maybe I get to read a sequel if the book does well. Maybe, I don't know. I don't know that they want to do that. Maybe they absolutely do not want to write a sequel to this. But maybe they do. And I'd read it. And this is a good book. Also, the cover is beautiful. I was gonna say, I might like buy a copy of this. I rented it from the library. But I might buy a copy to reread someday. But also, the cover is just gorgeous. I love the colors. The UK version has like more pink, so I think that's my favorite. The US version doesn't pop quite as much. I think that like pink border on the UK version, delicious, very attractive. It draws the eye. And I love the artwork. These are very accurate representations of the character. And like Gwen has freckles, and Isabel's got her blonde hair and her blue eyes, and Gwen has green eyes. And I think this is just a really pretty picture, and it's a really good art style and a good representation of the characters. And I think it just works. And I like the tagline, "Lock up your dragons, it's ladies' night." And ladies' night is like a club in town, or it's a club that does ladies' nights. I feel like it's a club, but maybe it's only open one night a week. I don't remember. But they go to ladies' night at one point, which is funny. And also there's a lady night. So the title's good. It works. It's clever. It's beautiful. It's well written. Just a great book. No complaints here, really, at all. Definitely recommend.